Hit it.
Welcome to the Test Talks podcast, the place to go to geek out on software testing. And now your host, whose mission is to help you succeed with test automation, Joe Colantonio.
Hey, it's Joe, and welcome to another episode of Test Talks. One of the most common challenges for quality engineers is making the mental shift from merely pursuing pass or fail test results to actually understanding the characteristics and trends of your test. And that's what we'll be test talking all about today with Greg Paskal. Greg shows how to discover the personality of your applications using dashboards created with Elasticsearch. So listen up and discover how to create tests that are both accurate and actionable. Check it out. And speaking about making your test results actionable, another area I see people struggling with in the test community is performance testing. Not only creating the performance test, but actually analyzing the results. And that's some of the things we'll be actually covering in this year's Perf Guild. So make sure to check it out. Head on over to perfguild.com. Register today. You only have a week left, so you don't want to miss out on this opportunity. How to create performance test results that are actionable, that can help you pinpoint the areas that are making your application slow and really are annoying your customers. So check it out, perfguild.com. Test Talks is sponsored by the fantastic folks at Sauce Labs, the cloud-based automated testing platform that eliminates the need to maintain your own Selenium grid and test infrastructure. Try it for free today. Visit testtalks.com and click on the Sign Up Now link under the homepage sponsor section. Hey Greg, welcome back to Test Talks. I think it's your 5th time on the show, most ever, so we always love having you, so welcome back.
Thanks, Joe. It's great to be here again, and I love talking to all of our test automation folks out there.
Awesome. So today I'd like to talk about your awesome new article that's getting a lot of traction and buzz in the community, and it's on improving quality assurance automation at Ramsey Solutions on the Elastic Stack website. But before we get into that, could you tell us a little bit more what you've been up to since episode 158, which I think it's almost been 2 years ago?
Sure. Well, we're doing some really cool stuff here at Ramsey with our automation. We are working on a brand new product this year. It's neat thinking about our automation as different products that we build. So we now have 2 really distinctive products that are very mature and being used. We have what we call custom automation. That's the automation most everybody thinks about, where we're interacting with an app, by editing, putting data into edit fields and clicking buttons, that sort of thing. And then we have our sanity check automation. Can you believe last year we ran over 2 million automated test cases? It's an incredible deal. And we captured all that data into something called a data lake. And that's going to be a cool part to share about in this episode today.
Awesome. Yeah, I definitely want to get to data lake because I don't know if that's your term or if that's a industry term. But first, I guess originally, what is Elastic Stack at a high level for folks that don't even know what we're talking about yet?
Yeah, I first heard about this this company Elastic and this tool set and even the term data lake about 2 years ago. Really, Elastic Stack is a group of open source tools, and one of them is like a data warehouse type of concept that gathers information that we would inject into it. Then there is an additional tool that allows searching on that. I believe they term that the Elasticsearch. And then the Kibana tool set, which allows the visualization of that. These are all kind of bundled together. Some of them are open source. Some of them are a bit proprietary to the Elastic tool set. But that's basically what the Elastic Stack is. It comes with this bundle of things, and the majority of it, I believe, is in the open source and can be installed, on a Linux system or something like that someone might have.
I believe you first heard about it at GTAC conference for Google.
Yes, Joe, you got a good memory. That's right. At the Google Test Automation Conference, this was a couple years ago, was the first time I was challenged with this idea of learning or figuring out a way to measure everything. This gentleman named Atif Memon, he now works for Apple. He's one of their automation evangelists over there. Isn't that a cool title? Boy, I'd love to have that.
Me too.
Yeah. Anyway, Atif really encouraged us to find ways to measure measure everything we could in automation. And so when I came back to Ramsey, around the same time, I heard about something called a data lake here. And man, the first time I heard about it, I thought, are we swimming in a bunch of ones and zeros? What is this data lake thing? So as I investigated it further, we had some folks here that really helped me get my mind around it. I realized this seemed to be a perfect complement to what ATIF at the GTech conference had encouraged us to do. It was a great place to gather all of that data. And so that was some of our first steps, was just figuring out what would we put in this data lake if we could, and then leading to the next things of, now it's in there, what do we do with it?
Very cool. So I guess this is kind of a little off topic, because I'm amazed that you went to a conference, you learned about something, and then you actually implemented it. So do you have any tips for folks that go to a conference to actually implement what they learned? Because that seems like a really struggle for some folks to get over that next step.
I think this is a perfect tangent, Joe, because I'm with you. A lot of folks struggle when they go to a conference. It's a great opportunity to go to a conference. If they come to the Automation Guild, let's say, or any of the other types of test conferences that are available, they get there and they're meeting folks, and they're maybe attending different sessions and whatever, and then they go back and it's as if all that effort and the cost and everything had no impact on them. I really think that hurts us as automation engineers. It hurts us as technologists that we don't go into a conference with the intent to learn and meet as many folks as we can, and from that, come away, even if it's one good takeaway or two takeaways that we can bring back to the office and apply for our employer and the work that we're doing. So that's definitely a strategy I've implemented for many years now. I even wrote a paper that's out on Sticky Minds on this, how to attend a conference well, on this topic, so that it would maybe help some of these folks have a strategy when they go there. But that's exactly what happened. I went there and I'm like, wow, this is something I can run with. So I definitely think that's something you have to be intentional about, because let's face it, if you go away for a week at a conference or whatever, it's easy to to get kind of lost in just moving from session to session, grabbing a meal here or there and taking in the sights. And your employer may not want to send you next time if there's really nothing that has takeaway at the end of the day.
I guess you mentioned a few times data lake. Can you just tell us a bit more? What is a data lake? Is that unique to Ramsey?
A data lake, it's this idea of a data warehouse idea. Well, you can take all types of data. Now, the ELK Stack is most commonly used for server log data. That's the most common use case. To be honest, the way that we're using it in the quality space is really standing out as something different and unusual. So much so that Elastic has taken interest in our usage of it. I just did a podcast with them 2 days ago, and a paper with them as well, the one that you referred to. So they are interested in the fact that we have found another way to use this tool set other than just consuming server logs and mining information out of it. So the way it was presented to me was, we have this container, and you could put all sorts of types of data in there, and then mine that data out, kind of like we do with SQL, but with the Kibana tool set and its own unique ways of mining that data out in meaningful ways, and then visualizing it.
So, Greg, you just mentioned using the data, your data lake. How are you using it differently than Elastic Stack or Elastic originally intended their product to be used?
I think Elastic probably designed. Have you ever heard of a tool called Loggly?
No.
Okay, Loggly. A lot of folks out there may have exposure to that tool. I think it's built on the Elastic tool set, because a lot of folks that use Loggly say, "Hey, this looks Elastic looks just like Loggly." I think that their initial intent was to consume these server logs, things like IP addresses and different states of applications, and maybe failure, dumps and that sort of thing. That seems to be the initial impetus for the tool, from what I can tell. It has a lot more potential. To be honest, it wasn't presented to me that way, so I didn't see it through that lens, and that probably helped a lot. When I saw it, it was really presented with this idea of, and I thought about a lake and putting fish in there and water and all these kinds of things together, and me being able to harvest that information in very unique ways ways that would raise and bring insights to risk that our tests were, identifying and information like that. And Joe, this probably ties into something that when I first got to Ramsey, I noticed there was a gap here, and there's a gap that a lot of automation engineers are going to relate to. So for those of you listening to this, consider this. You probably are running automated tests. And at the end of the automated test, what are you're doing some post-analysis, and you're probably just determining, did the test pass or fail? And I would say the majority of our users out there, or listeners, are probably in that space. So if I challenge you to just make one change to that, which is how are your tests performing over time, that's a great way to begin thinking about how you can use something like a data lake to capture test data and look at that data over time. That really made a difference for me, is to start thinking of it from that perspective.
So why did that change your perspective on data over time? What does that give you?
That's great. So when you start to look at data over time, you start to look at pass just to test pass or fail. You start to look at one other parameter that's very helpful, which is how long did that test take to run? It's something we overlook, and yet almost all of our tests produce that sort of data in the reporting. If you can just record that one attribute and say, hey, my login test, let's say it took 3 seconds to run, and you could start to record that information over the next, let's say the next 90 days. And you knew there was going to be some development in your sign-on process, maybe your login process, and you started to notice, hey, 30 days ago, we bumped up from 3 seconds to 4 seconds. And then about another month after that, we're now taking 5 seconds to consistently log into our app. That's something that can creep up over time. And as a tester, you might not even recognize that slight difference of 1 or 2 seconds. But we know that users of applications only have so much patience before they say, forget it, I'm moving on to something else. And if you could start to apply that to all of your automated test cases, you might start to identify areas of your application that are extremely latent or growing in latency. You might find that you're dependent upon an API that is common maybe across multiple applications in your company, and a change to that affected 2 or 3 applications. We've seen that very situation here. So by monitoring things like duration, you begin to get a new insight into what I call the personality of your application.
In your article, you actually show some visualizations that you've created to help you monitor your test data. And it looks like there's 4 unique views. Can you tell us a little bit more about what kind of dashboards you created? And do you have one master one, or do you create dashboards for each individual user case that you're interested in finding out more about?
Yeah, it's a great question, Joe. Well, I needed some initial, use case out there. The first one I decided to tackle was what would be something that would give me just an overview of the health and usage of our test automation. And so in that article, I think I call it the test run overview dashboard for those that might want to look up the article. And you'll see a very high level dashboard that shows the tests that have been run recently. It has kind of a running list. They just kind of pop off the bottom as they're rolling. It's very interesting to look up there and see what's being run at the moment. It tells me things like what users are utilizing our automation. We have automation built for every user in our team. We have almost 20 team members in our QA organization. And every manual tester owns test automation, and they execute it multiple times every day. That's part of our methodology here. So imagine investing time into automation. All of us have done this, and we know that's an expensive proposition. Imagine investing that time and nobody running it, right? We've been there too, right? You build it and some guy just doesn't know how to execute it, or he gets busy with other stuff. So I built a small little, what they call a visualization. A dashboard is made up of multiple visualizations. And that just shows me what users are using our automation and to what percentage are they using it. I have another small visualization in that same dashboard that helps us to know what products it's being run against. So imagine that we've got somebody out on vacation and we realize for our, maybe our shopping cart on our e-commerce solution, it hasn't been run in a couple of days. This would be the place we would start to notice that. And it would be a reminder, hey, we've got to go kick Bob's test off. We forgot he's on vacation today. when you've got as many team members as we have, it's easy to forget that, or as many products as we have. It's easy that something like that could get lost. There were some other really cool challenges that came out of this. And I thought about, again, that gentleman, Atif, at the GTAC conference. One of the things that Atif was doing when I met him is he was actually, he was doing some work for Google at the time. And he was exploring for Google how he could determine what automated tests were flaky in their test suite. Isn't that interesting that they care enough about it that they wanted to be intentional to look at the tests that were flaky and find a way to identify those, get those fixed or removed from the test set. This is probably a good point to share. Again, a flaky test, for those automation engineers that haven't heard that term, is any automated test you can run multiple times on the same build, but you get different results on. If you have a test like that, the term for that is called a flaky test. And really, it's something we can't put a lot of stock in. Even if you run it 10 times and it passes 8 times and fails twice, from my perspective, that's not a test I have a great amount of confidence in. Anyway, from Atif's perspective, identifying flaky tests is a smart thing because it means we're investing in tests that give us a good return at the end of the day. So I actually worked on a visualization to identify flaky tests, and it was pretty easy to do. All I did is I logged into the data lake every time we began a test set and every time we exited a test set. And I gave it a unique ID, a UUID, and said for every start, there should essentially be a finish. And if there's not, we're going to call that a flaky test. And so we have actually a visualization overall, the entire automation that shows us that, and down to the specific product. It's pretty cool. So that's really the first way I started to build a dashboard, was just learning these different types of visualizations and meeting certain needs that I wanted to get insights to. And Joe, one other last piece on that. That's also the time I really decided I needed to really build a philosophy on how I was going to build the dashboards and visualizations. And my one big rule out of that was build actionable visualizations. The data needs to be actionable because it's easy to create pretty pictures with these sort of tools. You got to go beyond that and say, can my manual tester do something with this data, or can the end user of this data do something with this? And in all cases, our data has the ability to take the next steps to dig in and find out more.
So, Greg, I'll be honest. We use Elastic in our company, and our dashboards don't look anywhere as nice as yours. Our dashboards are butt ugly. And I find it very difficult to actually create a visualization using Kibana. That's why I started using Report Portal, which does a lot of this stuff. I think it uses Elastic behind the scenes, so it does a really good job of doing all this automatically. How did you create your dashboards in Kibana? I mean, is it intuitive, or is it just me? Like, how hard was it to do? Like, I'll have a link to your dashboards in the show notes, but I mean, these are really good looking dashboards with really actual results, like you mentioned, but I have a hard time actually creating them myself.
Joe, you're not the only person that I've heard say that. I think that's unfortunate now because the tool is powerful, but unfortunately, it takes a while to get some familiarity with how to build these visualizations. I spent a number of hours yesterday just working through Kibana's state math logic because of a new dashboard that I'm working on. I've seen that problem for sure. I was fortunate enough to take the Kibana introductory class. I would love to have done that in person. I took it remotely. At least it gave me some insights of what was possible. And so, kind of like that conference I went to, when I took the class, I said, I'm going to, at the very least, get some ideas of what I want to create coming out of this class. I might not have a clue how to build it, but I'm going to be, kind of tenacious about it and figure out a way to, get this guy to take his first steps. And I had to do that. Now, once I got over the hump of that and built my first couple visualizations, it made a big difference. But to begin with, it was very difficult. And one of the things that I learned through that's probably worth passing to the audience, and it's very confusing about the Elastic toolset and Kibana in particular, is you will find that there are multiple ways of creating the exact same graph. So we don't use an enormous amount of pie charts, but you can create them 2 or 3 different ways within the tool. And the question is why? Well, because this is a tool set that allows add-ons and plugins and that sort of thing, and it's open source, you will find that other users come along and build other ways of generating these visualizations. And that was a big takeaway for me. I found that by going to the class and becoming part of the Elastic community and posting questions out there specifically to say, I don't get it. Why can I create a line chart here and a line chart here? And so the tool I predominantly build everything in is called Visual Builder. And that's the one I would encourage people. If you're going to put time into anything, that's the one to look at and try to get your arms around, because it provides the most flexibility of all the visualization tools within the Kibana tool set from my perspective.
Great advice. So Greg, your dashboards are only as good as your data. So how are you thinking while you're creating automated tests that we're going to create this kind of data that can be easily consumed by Elastic? Like, do you have a strategy for all your tests will have a certain output, and that output then maps automatically to whatever you're sending to Kibana or to Elasticsearch? Yes,
that's very accurate, Joe. It's actually one of the early steps. I was talking with one of our other automation engineers here, a real sharp guy, as we were kind of replaying, how did we get here? And one of the first things we had to do is say, well, what would we like to capture if we could capture anything? And at what states, at what point in time during the test automation process would we want to record this data? So we have followed the ISCQB standards as far as naming conventions. I think that's important to do, and we've tried to follow that as close as we can, so we're not reinventing something. But we do have your logical breaks of test suites with test sets, with test cases. We actually had to create a new term we call test runs, because we can have multiple suites within a test run. And so we have that broader category as well. And as we drill into each of these areas, as we execute a test run of a number of test suites, we're having multiple sessions getting logged into the lake at that time, right down to the test case. In the case of a test case, I mean, of course, you're going to record the results and the total time of the run and things like that. But that there are other things that we're now progressing towards that we're going to start to record as well. And that's some of the work we're doing this year. It'll probably take us close to a year to get it done, but that's going to be a neat podcast when we get to do that one, Joe, because I think that's going to really give our community some new ways of thinking about some automated tests. But for now, man, we're getting some really rich data out of what we're being able to log, even with pass, fail, and duration data.
How's it being logged, though? Is it a text file? Is it JSON that you're then sending?
It's a JSON file that we send into the lake. We actually at Ramsey have an intermediary piece that comes into place, and its whole purpose is a kind of data governance that we're injecting data into the lake that's gone through some sort of process to ensure it's in the right format or whatever. That's not necessary for folks that might want to start with this and might connect with the Elastic Cloud. Elastic provides their own cloud service, or you stand it up on your own. You would need to go through that step.
So, Greg, I'm trying to have people visualize this. I'll just do it from my experience, and my experience may be very bad, and you can correct me. So we have a Serenity-based BDD framework that outputs JSON. We then have an app that we created that reads that JSON, parses it, and then sends it to Kibana. And then in Kibana, I believe there's a Discover section. In the Discover section, you could do like queries to see what data you can return. And then then there's a visualization that you can then take that data, create a visualization off it. And then once you have these visualizations, you can add them to different dashboards. Is that the step? Like, what is the step to create a dashboard at a high level?
Yeah, that's good. Well, a dashboard is made up of multiple visualizations. And that Discover tool that you're talking about, it's I think of it kind of like a debugger. I mean, it lets me get it to the raw data. It lets me experiment with their filtering capabilities. A lot of learning to use Kibana is really mastering their ability to create filters. It's another important part. Also understanding how their timelines and things like that work. Kibana is exceptional at data that's recorded over time. This brand new dashboard I'm working on, I actually had to create what's called a new index. An index is usually referenced by time, or it has a time component to it. I'm working on a new dashboard that excludes that intentionally because I found I was getting boxed in by the other approach. But understanding that filter approach is really important, and again, worth digging in on the training of the tool set. But once you build a number of these visualizations, it's like in the article I talk about this. When you build a dashboard, it's like any form of communication, Joe. You have to think about the target audience and what do you want them to come away with. So some of my target audience dashboards are like for our QA managers. I have specifically one for them. I have dashboards that are specifically for our manual testers. I have ones for myself and our other automation engineers, so we can, determine the health of things. We have a brand new one that's pretty darn cool that we're now using some of our sanity check automation to perform in-house monitoring of our QA environments, just to make sure everything's ready for when our manual testers come in every morning, that everything they need to do their work is up and running and ready to go. But each of those were first thought about who's the audience and what do I want them to come away with, and then making those individual visualizations very actionable that compose the dashboard.
So, Greg, you mentioned that a few times, making sure your dashboard is giving you actionable information. Mm-hmm. Do you have like a high-level list of what you consider actionable that every automation engineer should have in their dashboards? Or not every, but best practice or good practice of actionable metrics for automation that you think everyone should be capturing?
Sure. Well, Kibana does make this part pretty easy to do, but let's talk about one of the first things we talked about, which is capturing duration. So you and I know if we plotted duration of a specific test case over time on a timeline, we'd be able to see, okay, it took 3 seconds, it's progressively getting longer over the next 30 days, 4 or 5 seconds. And what would happen if one day you ran the test and all of a sudden login took 20 or 30 seconds? So this is going to spike on the timeline on the line graph. What Kibana allows you to easily do is you're going to see that spike on the timeline, and by rolling your mouse over that, you're able to click that, and it turns into a filter that starts to filter the data by that particular, in this case, maybe that specific test case, or by that product, because we have multiple products that are on the same timeline. So by providing that filter on that test case, now I might create additional dashboards to dig in. So one of our philosophies to our test automation is to provide as much verbose information whenever we have a fail that it helps the manual tester derive what's really wrong here. And we record that information in the lake. So, but I don't show that necessarily on the timeline view. That would be too cluttered. That's another dashboard. So when I click that point that, let's say, is a 20-second run on login, I've now filtered my data down, and I go and switch to the other dashboard, which is meant to allow the tester to dig in and see what were the exceptions that came out of this failed test case. And they can dig further and further in there. And that's classically how it's used, and very helpful.
Very cool. So another issue I usually see with dashboarding is you may have dashboarding and awesome dashboarding, but no one looks at it. I guess maybe making them actionable is one way to get them to look at it. Like, how do you make communication better between teams so that they are consuming these awesome dashboards that you put time and effort into?
We have two ways we approach that. I believe every QA team should essentially have an intranet site, almost like the website for the QA team, and that's where we link to all of our resources and everything. I've done that at multiple companies, and it's really proved to be successful. Now, what's cool about Kibana is it has a markdown capability, and I actually created a visualization, believe it or not, and its whole purpose is just navigation. And not only is it navigation, it mirrors the navigation we use on our intranet site as well. And so because our team members, our manual testers, are already using our intranet site to get access to their data sheets and their METS grids and test cases and other things like that, right along in that same exact piece of nav is the analysis. And all that does is it links them right into the Kibana reporting right from there. So we try to make it very easy to get to. We don't bury that thing down as a bookmark somewhere or whatever. It's not what I call tribal knowledge. This is something everybody should easily understand. So that's a very important part. And then, of course, I shared this earlier that sometimes, I would say maybe even more than most times, more than half the time, there is this temptation when you can take data and create a pretty picture with it, that you wind up kind of going nuts with this. You got a million pie charts and all sorts of line charts, and it's usually on some dashboard on a wall, and it's almost meaningless. People look at it and they're like, wow, that's really cool, but it's not telling me anything. And so that's really why each visualization is meant to be actionable. So our team members know this isn't on here unless it's meant, I can do something with this data. That's very much intentional, and they know how to drill in and dig in, and even using the filters is something I'm teaching, one team member after another how to really even take that to the next level and mine that data out.
You also mentioned earlier this dashboarding, it lends itself to help you with monitoring as well. Could you just talk a little bit more about that? Maybe give us an example.
Yes. So our automated test, especially our sanity test simply goes to a URL and validates that a couple key takeaways are available on that page. It could be a call to action like create an account or whatever exists on the page. It doesn't functionally interact with those. What I realize is that a sanity test is very similar to a monitoring tool. And so I built a specific dashboard just to do that very thing. It runs a sanity test across all of the applications we have in-house. I bet we have easily 20 applications in-house now. And it spot checks a number of very important pages on each of those. And it provides a simple dot anytime one of those things isn't available on another line dashboard. That's available in that article as well, so users can see that. So imagine a dashboard with a bunch of lines going horizontally across it. And each of those lines is a specific application we have in-house. And every point in there is every 15-minute check-in we do of that application to make sure it's ready and online and ready for our manual testers to use. We stood one of these things up, and sure enough, we started to get some great wins out of it. We started to notice some patterns when we would have problems with our QA environment, maybe not coming up as we expected in the morning, or issues that we would have there. And this is just an early. We're probably 3 months into this phase of using automation for a type of monitoring, but I can quickly see the other folks are starting to see this and get some ideas of why don't we start to look at these things using similar dashboards. We've even applied it to a particular production, very critical component that we want to monitor. We actually apply some automation there very careful and cautiously, but we want to make sure that that piece is running. And I created even a little miniature version of that bigger dashboard just to keep an eye on that. So it's great for us as automation engineers to realize that our capabilities as automation engineers allows us to build great monitoring as well. We actually have the skills to do that because we understand synchronization and how to identify things on a web page or an application we interact with regularly.
Okay, Greg, before we go, is there one piece of actionable advice you can give someone to help them get started with ELK Stack? And let us know the best way to find, contact you, or learn more about these awesome dashboards you've created.
Sure, Joe. Well, I would suggest folks go out to Elastic's website and check out maybe a free demo on the Elastic Cloud product, or consider standing maybe an instance of this up on a Linux box you have and experiment with it. Be patient and start kind of taking those initial baby steps of how do I get data in there? What data should I get in there? And then how do I make something meaningful out of it by creating your first visualization? And Joe, I'm so easy to find online. People can just do a Google search on Greg Paskal. That's Greg Paskal, and you're going to find a lot of content I have out there. I'm really easy to find on LinkedIn as well, and I love to connect with our users on LinkedIn and share little tidbits throughout the week and encourage them as well. So that's a great way to reach out to me. And last but not least, if you go to realworldtestautomation.com, you'll find this article along with many other articles I've written and links to other areas that'll help you in your test automation, and also a link to my book out there, Test Automation in the Real World. So that's the best way to get a hold of me, Joe.
Thank you, Greg, for your dashboarding awesomeness. For links to everything of value we covered in this episode, head on over to testtalks.com/247. And while you're there, make sure to click on that sign up for a free trial link under the exclusive sponsor section to learn all about Sauce Labs' awesome products and services. And as I mentioned, make sure to head on over to perfguild.com. You only have 1 week left to register for an online conference dedicated 100% to helping you succeed with creating performance testing awesomeness. You don't want to miss out. Register today, perfguild.com. So that's it for this episode of Test Talks. I'm Joe, and my mission is to help you succeed with creating automation awesomeness. As always, test everything and keep the good. Cheers.
Thanks for listening to the Test Talks podcast. Head on over to www.testtalks.com for full show notes, amazing blog articles, and other automation awesomeness.